The coffee had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but I kept gripping the ceramic mug anyway. Its fading warmth was a small comfort against the evening chill seeping through the old window frames of my Montclair home. Outside, the last sliver of the sun bled across the New Jersey sky, painting the clouds in shades of orange and purple. This was my favorite time of day. Quiet, peaceful. A well-earned silence after 40 years of sirens and alarms, a lifetime spent running into fires when everyone else was running out. The sound of a car door slamming shut shattered the tranquility. I looked up to see a sleek, dark sedan, parked in my gravel driveway, a car far too expensive for this quiet, working-class neighborhood. A moment later, my daughter Eleanor, my Ellie, stepped out, followed by her fiancé, Julian Croft. My heart gave a familiar leap of joy. It had been weeks since they'd driven out from the city. Eleanor breezed into the kitchen, her designer heels clicking sharply against the worn linoleum. My late wife, Sarah, and I had installed 30 years ago. She gave me a quick, air kiss near my cheek that smelled of expensive perfume. Julian followed, sprawling across my old recliner like he owned the place, his gold watch catching the lamplight with every flick of his wrist. "Dad, we need to talk about something important," Eleanor began, her voice carrying a forced sweetness I knew all too well. It was the same tone she used at 16 when she wanted the keys to my truck. I set down the mug, bracing myself. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" Julian leaned forward, a practiced, charming smile spreading across his face, a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Arthur, we've finalized the venue, the Plaza in Manhattan. To lock it in, and to cover the kind of celebration Ellie deserves, we're counting on $50,000. The number hung in the air, heavy and obscene. $50,000. My entire pension, the nest egg I had carefully guarded for my retirement, barely covered property taxes and groceries. The silence stretched, broken only by the hum of the old refrigerator. "Kids, I don't have that kind of money," I finally managed to say, the words feeling like gravel in my mouth. That was the cue. Eleanor's face crumpled on command, her eyes welling up with perfectly formed tears. "Dad, this is my one shot at a perfect wedding. Julian's family is important. Influential people are coming. I can't have it look pie and cheap." I looked at my daughter, at the beautiful woman she'd become, and saw the shadow of the manipulative teenager she'd been. Julian's expression had turned cold, a mask of disappointment. My uncle, Marcus Thorne, always says a man provides for his family's big moments. The jab landed precisely where it was intended. He was questioning my worth as a father. "Dad, if you really love me, you'll find a way," Eleanor whispered, the tears now streaming down her cheeks. "Remember when I used to play dress-up in Mom's wedding gown? I've dreamed about this my whole life." The mention of Sarah was a low blow, and she knew it. It twisted something deep in my chest. Sarah would have wanted our daughter to be happy, but she also would have seen through this emotional blackmail in a heartbeat. I was a retired firefighter, not a Wall Street banker. My life was built on saving people, not saving money. "Eleanor, you know I'd do anything for you," I said, my voice strained. "But I'm living on a pension. I've got maybe 30,000 in savings, and that's supposed to last me the rest of my life." 30,000 is a start," Julian interjected smoothly, already pulling out his phone. "You could take a loan for the rest. With your service record and pension, you're a reliable borrower." "A loan?" "Julian, I'm 65 years old. It's what loving fathers do," Eleanor sobbed, delivering the final, crushing blow. "Mom would have found a way. She always believed in making dreams come true." I looked at her tear-streaked face, at Julian's expectant stare, at the stack of bills on my counter. The walls of my small kitchen felt like they were closing in. I was trapped, and they knew it. After they left, the house felt unnervingly quiet, the silence pressing in on me, thick with the phantom scent of Eleanor's perfume and the echo of their demands. I spread my financial papers across the old kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped Ellie with her homework and shared 1,000 meals with Sarah. Bank statements, pension documents, a small stack of utility bills. The green display of my calculator stared back at me with cold, hard numbers. $29,947 and 63 cents. That was it. My entire life, 40 years of walking into burning buildings, of careful saving and modest living, boiled down to that single, insufficient number. Sleep didn't come that night. I dozed off in my recliner, only to jolt awake minutes later, my mind racing with interest rates and repayment schedules. The bedroom upstairs felt too big, too empty without Sarah to talk things through with. She would have known what to do. She'd have seen the manipulation for what it was and found a way to say no, firmly but lovingly. But I was never as strong as she was, especially when it came to Ellie. I stayed in the living room, watching the ghostly blue light of the television flicker across the family photos on the mantel, feeling the weight of the promise I had made. By morning, exhaustion had given way to a grim resolve. First National Bank downtown looked the same as it had 30 years ago when Sarah and I opened our first joint account. The marble floors still echoed with footsteps. The brass fixtures still gleamed under the fluorescent lights. But today, it felt different, intimidating. I clutched my folder of documents like a shield and approached the customer service desk. A young loan officer named Carlos Martinez, who looked younger than my own daughter, greeted me with a firm handshake. His office was small but tidy, photos of his smiling wife and children arranged neatly beside his computer. It was a painful reminder of the family joy I was trying to preserve. "I need to borrow $20,000, I said, the words coming out steadier than I felt. "It's for my daughter's wedding." He tapped at his keyboard, pulling up my history. "I see you've been with us for a long time, Mr. Miller. Your pension deposits are very consistent." He made some notes. "With your credit score, we can definitely work something out. The interest rate will be 7.9%. We can structure the payments over 5 years to keep them manageable." 5 years. I'd be 70 when this was paid off. "What would the monthly payments be?" I asked, my throat dry. "Approximately $405 a month." The number hit me like a physical blow. It was more than my budget for groceries and utilities combined. It meant cutting back on everything. No more small pleasures, no safety net, just bare-bones living until the debt was cleared. But then I saw Eleanor's face in my mind, the feigned tears, the mention of her mother. I had already committed. "I'll take it," I said. The paperwork was a blur of signatures and fine print. Carlos was patient, explaining each document, but all I could think about was the finality of it all. With each stroke of the pen, I felt a piece of my future slipping away. As I signed the last page, my hand trembled slightly. This was it. The sacrifice was complete. The email notification arrived on Friday morning, its subject line clinical and devoid of emotion. Deposit processed. $20,000. The screen glowed with the confirmation. I stared at the number for a long moment, feeling a strange mix of relief and profound heaviness. I had the money. I could give my daughter her dream. The relief was for her. The heaviness was for me. I picked up the phone and dialed her number. "Dad, perfect timing," she chirped, her voice a whirlwind of activity. "I was just looking at flower arrangements with the wedding planner. We found the most incredible orchids." She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask about the loan. Her excitement was a runaway train, and I was just a passenger who'd paid for the ticket. "Honey, can you and Julian come over this afternoon?" I asked, cutting through the chatter. "I have some good news about the wedding funding." Her shriek of excitement nearly burst my eardrum. "Oh my goodness, yes! We'll be there at 3. Dad, you're amazing!" They arrived exactly on time, Eleanor practically bouncing on her toes as she hugged me at the door. Julian followed, carrying a leather portfolio that probably cost more than my monthly pension. I settled into my recliner, the worn fabric groaning in protest, and faced them. The bank documents were folded neatly in my lap. "I secured the funding," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "All $50,000. Eleanor launched herself at me, burying her face in my shoulder. This time, her tears felt genuine tears of joy. "Dad, I can't believe you did this. We're going to have the most incredible wedding. Julian's whole family will be so impressed." Julian, for his part, looked genuinely surprised. He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of what might have been respect in his eyes. "How did you manage that?" "I liquidated my savings," I explained, keeping my tone even. "And I took out a personal loan for the remainder. The words tasted like ash, but I swallowed them down. The money is available for your wedding expenses. I let them enjoy the moment. Let the reality of their dream come true sink in. Then, I took a breath. There's just one condition. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Eleanor pulled back from the hug, her joy replaced by confusion. Julian's expression turned wary, his lawyerly instincts on high alert. "What kind of condition?" he asked, his voice sharp. "It's not much," I said, trying to keep my voice reasonable. "I want to invite someone. Someone who means a great deal to me, who's been like a brother to me for 40 years. My old partner from the firehouse, Frank Kowalski." Eleanor stared at me. "Frank? Dad, this is our wedding. We've already finalized the guest list. The caterer needs exact numbers." I understand, but this is important. Just one additional person. Frank is the closest thing to family I have left." Julian leaned forward, his friendly facade completely gone. "Listen, Arthur," he said, the respect from moments ago vanishing. "You're paying, we appreciate that. But we decide who comes. That's how this works. Family and close friends only." "Frank is family," I insisted, my voice rising slightly. "Dad, don't be so selfish," Eleanor snapped, her voice taking on a shrill edge I hadn't heard since she was a teenager. "This is supposed to be about Julian and me, not about your old firehouse buddies." The cruelty of her words stunned me into silence. Selfish, after everything I had just done. "I'm not asking for much," I repeated quietly. "One seat at a table that's being paid for with my money." "Money we're grateful for," Julian interjected, standing up and straightening his jacket. "But gratitude doesn't buy you control you don't have. Our wedding, our rules." I looked at my daughter, a desperate plea in my eyes. But she wouldn't meet my gaze. She had already chosen her side. "Dad, just think about what we said, okay?" she said, her voice softening into a tone of pity that was somehow worse than her anger. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." They were at the door before I could find my voice. The lock clicked shut behind them, a soft, final sound that sealed me inside my quiet house, alone with the bank documents scattered on the floor. I had given them my future, and in return, they wouldn't even give my best friend a seat at the table. The weeks that followed blurred into a painful, quiet routine. April arrived, bringing with it the false promise of spring renewal. But in our family, something had withered and died. The phone still rang, but the warmth was gone. When Eleanor called now, her voice was brisk, efficient, the tone of a project manager addressing a subordinate. Our conversations were no longer about her life or mine. They were about logistics, vendor payments, deposit deadlines. "Dad, we need the florist deposit by Thursday," she'd say, her voice hurried. 2,000 should cover the arrangements we selected." I didn't ask what arrangements she had selected. I'd learned my lesson after a particularly humiliating afternoon at the florist's shop. My suggestion of simple, elegant centerpieces, the kind Sarah would have loved, was met with a shared, embarrassed glance between Eleanor and Julian. "Dad, your taste is just different from what we're going for," she had explained, as if speaking to a child. Different. That was the word for it. My world of careful budgets and quiet dignity was different from their world of performative luxury. The exclusions became systematic. I was a silent partner in a business where my only role was to provide capital. Meetings with the caterer, the band, the photographer, they all happened without me. I was simply informed of the outcomes via cheerful, hollow phone calls. "Everything's going perfectly, Dad," Eleanor would report. "The venue coordinator loves our vision. Our vision. Never yours. Never ours as a family. Always theirs." The final insult, disguised as a courtesy, arrived in the mail in early May. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope, heavy with the importance of its contents. The calligraphy on the front was flawless, each letter a perfect swirl of ink. But it wasn't addressed to Dad. It wasn't even addressed with a personal touch. It was addressed to Mr. Arthur Miller. The invitation sat on my kitchen table for 3 days before I could bring myself to open it. I already knew what it would say. The cardstock was expensive, the printing immaculate. It requested my presence at the celebration of their marriage. My presence. Not my blessing, not my joy, not my role as the father who had raised this beautiful bride and was funding her entire perfect day. I was just another name on a list of 300 people, a guest at my own daughter's wedding. I filled out the RSVP card with a shaking hand, ticking the box that said, "Will attend." As I sealed the envelope, I felt a cold finality settle in my heart. I was no longer the father of the bride. I was just the man who paid the bills. The morning of May 10th arrived with a sky so perfectly blue it felt like a mockery. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves on the old oak tree in my front yard, the kind of day Sarah would have called a blessing. I dressed carefully in my best suit, the dark wool feeling heavy on my shoulders. The man staring back at me from the mirror looked older than his 65 years, his face etched with new lines carved by months of quiet stress. My old friend Frank Kowalski picked me up. He didn't say much, but his presence was a solid, comforting anchor. As we pulled up to street, Matthew's Church, we were met with a sea of luxury cars, BMWs, Mercedes, cars that belonged to people who had never worried about a loan. The inside of the church was breathtaking, transformed by what must have been thousands of dollars worth of white roses and lilies. Their scent hung heavy in the air, mixing with the smell of polished wood and old stone. A young usher in a tuxedo approached us with a practiced smile. "Welcome. You can sit anywhere you like," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the vast expanse of pews. Anywhere? I had expected to be led to the front row, to the seat of honor reserved for the father of the bride. Instead, Frank and I found ourselves in the back, behind clusters of elegantly dressed strangers whispering excitedly. I watched as the front rows filled with people I'd never seen before. Julian's colleagues, Eleanor's new important friends, and what appeared to be Julian's extended family. In the second row, commanding quiet respect from those around him, sat Marcus Thorne. Then the organ music swelled, a majestic sound that filled the sanctuary. The processional began. Julian took his place at the altar, looking handsome and triumphant. And then the heavy oak doors swung open, and Eleanor appeared. My breath caught in my throat. She was radiant. The dress, a creation of silk and lace that had cost a small fortune, flowed around her like water. Her face, framed by a delicate veil, was luminous. This was my little girl, my Ellie, transformed into a breathtaking bride. A fierce, painful wave of love and pride washed over me. For 30 years I had pictured this moment. I had imagined her holding my arm, my hand patting hers. I had imagined leaning in to whisper how much I loved her before placing her hand in her new husband's. I had imagined the tears of joy in her eyes as she gave me one last look as her father's daughter. The reality was a cold, empty space beside me. She walked alone down the long aisle, her gaze fixed entirely on Julian. She passed my pew without a flicker of acknowledgement, without a single glance. It was as if I wasn't there. In that moment, watching my daughter glide past me like a beautiful stranger, I understood that I hadn't just been excluded from the planning. I had been erased from the story altogether. The Plaza Hotel rose before us like a palace from another world. Valets in crisp uniforms whisked away luxury cars while guests in designer gowns and tuxedos swept through the grand entrance. Every detail screamed wealth, and every detail was a line item on a bill I would be paying for the next 5 years. Frank and I entered the ballroom, and the sheer opulence of the place was staggering. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, casting a glittering light over 300 guests who mingled and laughed, champagne flutes in hand. We were aliens in this glittering world. I found our assigned table, predictably tucked away in a far corner, and nursed a whiskey I couldn't really afford. I watched Eleanor and Julian hold court near the bar, looking like royalty. Then Julian spotted me. A cruel, knowing smile spread across his face. "Arthur," he called, his voice booming artificially. "Come meet some of our friends." It was a command, not an invitation. I reluctantly left Frank and walked over, feeling a dozen pairs of eyes on my simple, off-the-rack suit. "Everyone, this is my father-in-law," Julian announced to the circle of young, polished professionals. "A real hero. He took out a loan for all this." He gestured grandly at the ballroom. A few people chuckled politely. "Yes," Julian continued, his eyes glittering with malice. "He's really committed to making our dreams come true. Aren't you, Arthur?" "I just want my daughter to be happy," I mumbled, the words feeling weak and hollow. Happy has an expensive price tag, apparently, Julian laughed. But that's what credit is for, right? I stood there, a frozen smile on my face, as he regaled them with the story of my unreasonable request to invite a guest, painting me as a controlling old man. I was trapped, a prop in his performance of magnanimous groom. Then, the energy in the room shifted. A distinguished, silver-haired man appeared in the doorway, and a hush fell over the conversations near him. He carried himself with an aura of quiet power that commanded immediate respect. Marcus Thorne had arrived. Julian's transformation was instantaneous. The smug bully vanished, replaced by an eager, almost childlike nephew. "Uncle Marcus!" he exclaimed, rushing to greet the older man with a warm embrace. "I'm so glad you could make it." I wouldn't miss it, son," Marcus said, his voice warm but firm. He scanned the room with a businessman's sharp eye. "You've outdone yourself. This is magnificent. Every penny worth it," Julian beamed. "When you love someone, you spare no expense." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. As the evening wore on and dinner was served, Julian never left his uncle's side. From my distant table, I watched him, animated and charming, a different person entirely from the cold, cruel man who had tormented me for months. Finally, the master of ceremonies called for the toasts. Julian practically bounced to his feet, grabbing the microphone, his face flushed with wine and excitement. He looked directly at me, and in that moment, I knew this was his grand finale. The public humiliation was about to begin. "Thank you, everyone." His voice boomed through the sound system. He praised his bride, his friends, and then he paused dramatically. "And I especially want to thank my father-in-law, who showed such incredible financial dedication to our happiness." A few uncertain chuckles rippled through the crowd. This was it. I braced myself for the final assault. "Seriously, folks," Julian continued, his voice dripping with condescending praise. "Let me tell you about commitment. How many fathers would liquidate their entire life savings for their daughter's wedding?" The laughter from the surrounding tables was more forced now, a little uncomfortable. I saw a few guests exchange uneasy glances. Even Eleanor looked down at her plate, a faint blush of what might have been shame creeping up her neck. But Julian, intoxicated by the spotlight, was oblivious. He raised his champagne glass higher. But that's not all. When his savings weren't enough, this dedicated man walked into a bank at 65 years old and took out a personal loan. The ballroom had grown quieter now. The cruelty was becoming too obvious, even for strangers. This wasn't a tribute. It was a vivisection. And the best part, Julian's voice boomed into the near silence, is how he handled our little disagreements. He actually wanted to control our guest list. Can you believe it? As if paying for something gives you a say in how it's used. He paused for a laugh that didn't come. I sat frozen in my chair, my knuckles white on the table's edge, enduring the assault. Beside me, Frank's jaw was a knot of stone-hard muscle. "But don't worry about old Arthur," Julian said, his smile unwavering. "We had to set him straight about who makes the decisions in this family." It was then that he delivered the final, fateful blow. He raised his glass in a mock toast, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. "So let's give a round of applause to the man who made this all possible, the man who mortgaged his golden years for our golden day. Here's to Arthur Miller." The name hit the air like a physical force. Across the room, at the head table, I saw it happen. Marcus Thorne, who had been watching his nephew with a thoughtful, almost clinical expression, suddenly went rigid. His fork, halfway to his mouth, clattered onto his plate. His champagne glass tipped, spilling golden liquid across the pristine white tablecloth like a spreading stain. His face went pale, his eyes wide with a look of utter shock and disbelief. The entire ballroom, which had been focused on Julian's cruel performance, now swiveled to stare at Marcus. Julian, still basking in his own glory, hadn't noticed. He was waiting for the applause. "Stop," the word exploded from Marcus, a command of such force that Julian physically flinched at the microphone. The sound system amplified the single word, making it echo through the cavernous hall. The room fell into a dead, electric silence. "Give me that microphone," Marcus commanded, his voice low but carrying an absolute authority that no one dared question. He was already on his feet, his chair scraping harshly against the marble floor. Julian stood frozen, his smug smile wiped from his face, replaced by pure, slack-jawed confusion. "Uncle Marcus, what's—" The microphone. Simon. Now. Julian's hand trembled as he numbly extended the microphone toward his uncle. The confidence that had carried him through months of tormenting me had completely evaporated. Marcus strode to the center of the dance floor, his face a mask of grim determination. He took the microphone, his hands steady, and his eyes found mine across the crowded, silent room. In them, I saw a flicker of something I couldn't understand, a dawning recognition that was about to change everything. Marcus held the microphone with a steady hand, but I could see the raw emotion simmering just beneath his composed exterior. The ballroom was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the chandeliers overhead. 300 guests, frozen in anticipation. 32 years ago, Marcus began, his voice deep and clear, amplified by the sound system. On a cold November night, there was a terrible house fire on Maple Street, right here in this city. A jolt went through me. Maple Street, a memory I hadn't revisited in decades, surfaced from a deep, scarred place. The acrid smell of smoke, the blistering heat on my face, the sound of a child's terrified crying. A few of the older guests murmured, a flicker of recognition passing through the crowd. "A young father and mother died in that blaze," Marcus continued, his eyes locked on his nephew. Julian's face was a canvas of confusion. They left behind their 2-year-old son. He was trapped on the second floor, with the flames consuming the staircase below. The memory was vivid now, a ghost rising in the opulent ballroom. I could see the orange flames licking at the broken windows, feel the desperate helplessness of the neighbors gathered on the street. The fire department hadn't arrived yet. We all knew the child was lost. But one man, Marcus's voice grew stronger, more passionate. A complete stranger driving home from his shift heard that little boy's cries, and he didn't hesitate. I could feel the phantom heat on my skin, the splintering wood of the front door as I kicked it in. It wasn't a choice. It was an instinct. A child was in there. You go in. This stranger ran into that burning building without a thought for his own safety. Marcus's voice echoed, narrating my own past. He fought his way through blinding smoke and falling embers. He found that terrified child hiding in a closet, and he carried him out to safety just minutes before the entire roof collapsed. I remembered the weight of the small, sobbing boy in my arms, his tiny hands clinging to my neck as I stumbled back out into the cold night air. The relief was so profound it felt like a physical blow. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as guests began to understand the gravity of the story. Several people turned in their seats to look toward our back table. "That stranger," Marcus said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide, suffered second and third-degree burns on his hands and arms. He spent 3 days in the hospital. When he was discharged, he asked for nothing. No recognition, no reward. He only asked that the child be placed with family who would love and care for him. Julian was staring at his uncle now, the dawning horror of recognition in his eyes. He knew this story. It was his own. That 2-year-old boy, Marcus's voice broke slightly, grew up to become a successful man, surrounded by love, never knowing the name of the hero who saved his life. That child was you, Simon. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Julian's champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor. Eleanor covered her mouth with both hands, a sob escaping her lips. "And that hero," Marcus said, turning his body slowly, his gaze sweeping past the stunned faces until his eyes found mine across the vast, silent room. He raised a hand, not in accusation, but in tribute. He pointed directly at me. "The man who ran into a burning building to save a stranger's child, who asked for nothing in return, who carried the scars of that night for 32 years without ever speaking of his courage, is Arthur Miller." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence so profound it felt louder than any noise. It was the sound of 300 people processing an impossible truth. Julian stood frozen, his face a storm of confusion, disbelief, and a horror so deep it seemed to hollow him out from the inside. He looked from his uncle to me, his mouth opening and closing without a sound. And in that moment, in the wreckage of his perfect, cruel evening, he finally saw me. For a long moment, Nobody moved. The only sound in the vast ballroom was the echo of Marcus's last word, hanging in the air like a final judgment. Julian stood by the head table, his body swaying as if struck by a physical blow. His face, which had been so full of cruel confidence just minutes before, was now a mask of utter devastation. Then his legs gave out. He collapsed back into his chair, not with the easy grace of a guest taking his seat, but with the dead weight of a man whose entire world had just been obliterated. He buried his face in his hands, and a sound tore from his throat, a raw, ragged sob of a man completely and utterly broken. The silence held for another beat. Then he rose on unsteady legs. Every eye in the room followed him as he began to walk, not toward the bar or the dance floor, but toward the back of the room, toward my table. Each step seemed to take a monumental effort, the walk of a man crossing a vast, barren landscape of his own making. When he reached my table, he didn't speak. He simply dropped to his knees on the marble floor, this proud, arrogant man, humbling himself in front of 300 people. "Arthur," he choked out, his voice cracking, tears streaming freely down his face. "Please, please, forgive me. I didn't know. God, I didn't know." I looked down at the man who had tormented me for months, the man I had saved as a child. And in that moment, all the anger, all the hurt, it just evaporated. All I saw was that scared little boy from the fire, all grown up and lost in a different kind of wreckage. I reached down and put my hands on his shoulders. "Stand up, son," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You stand up. You be better than you were. That's how you make this right." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading hope. I helped him to his feet. He nodded, wiping his face with the back of his hand, then turned and walked back toward the microphone with a new, somber purpose. "I need that microphone back," he said to his uncle. Marcus handed it over without a word. Julian faced the silent crowd, his posture no longer arrogant, but stooped with the weight of his shame. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice was rough with emotion, Everything I said earlier tonight was wrong. It was worse than wrong. It was cruel and ungrateful and a lie." He took a deep, shuddering breath and turned to look directly at me. "This man, Arthur Miller, is not just the father of my beautiful wife. He's not just the generous soul who funded this incredible celebration you see around you." His voice grew stronger, finding its footing in this terrible new truth. "He's the reason I'm alive. 32 years ago, he risked his own life to save mine from a burning building. He carried me to safety, and he carries the scars of his courage to this day." A wave of amazement washed over the crowd. "And how did I repay him?" Julian's voice broke again, but he pressed on. "I repaid him by treating him like he was beneath me, by mocking his sacrifice in front of all of you, by making him feel small and unwanted at his own daughter's wedding. The man who saved my life had to take out a loan to pay for my dream, and I thanked him by turning him into a punchline." He turned fully toward me then, his voice ringing across the ballroom. "But that ends tonight. Right here, right now." He picked up a freshly poured champagne glass from the table. "Ladies and gentlemen, please raise your glasses. Not to me. Not to my new wife. Not to our future." 300 guests slowly rose to their feet, their glasses held aloft, the crystal catching the light of the chandeliers like 1,000 tiny stars. "Raise your glasses to Arthur Miller." Julian's voice rang with a genuine, powerful emotion I had never heard from him before. "The man who gave me my life, not once, but twice. Once, when he pulled me from that fire, and again tonight, when he showed me what true grace looks like, by forgiving someone who didn't deserve it. To Arthur! To Arthur!" The cry rose from every corner of the ballroom, followed by a thunderous, overwhelming wave of applause. It washed over me, the sound of 300 people rising to their feet, not for the groom, not for the bride, but for me. And in that moment, surrounded by their respect, I finally felt seen. The applause washed over me, a thunderous wave of validation from a room full of strangers. But the real gift, the only thing that truly mattered, wasn't their applause. It was seeing my daughter's face. Through the crowd of standing guests, Eleanor made her way toward me. Her perfect makeup was ruined by streaks of tears, but her eyes, when they met mine, were shining with a new, profound understanding. She wasn't looking at a bank account or an obstacle anymore. She was looking at her father. She reached me and threw her arms around my neck, holding on with a strength I hadn't felt from her in years. "Dad," she whispered into my shoulder, her voice thick with sobs. "I'm so sorry. I am so, so sorry. I'm so proud of you. I love you." I held my daughter close, the daughter I thought I had lost, and felt the last of the bitterness wash away, replaced by the simple, powerful warmth of forgiveness. "I love you too, Ellie," I whispered back. "I always have." The rest of the evening passed in a surreal, emotional haze. The party that had begun with my humiliation was now a celebration of my quiet heroism. Strangers came up to shake my hand, their eyes filled with respect. Julian, a changed man, stayed close by, his earlier arrogance replaced by a quiet, somber humility. He introduced me to Marcus Thorne properly, and as I shook the hand of the man who had given me back my dignity, I understood that the world, in its own strange way, eventually finds its balance. But as the night wound down, and the guests began to depart, I looked at Ellie, now sitting beside me, her hand resting on mine. I looked at Julian, who was watching us with an expression of deep, heartfelt remorse, and I realized the truth. The real toast of the evening wasn't to me, the hero. It was to the quiet power of doing the right thing, even when no one is watching, even when it costs you everything. It was a toast to the truth, which can sometimes take 32 years to find its voice. And it was a toast to forgiveness, the only force strong enough to heal the wounds we inflict on each other. Sometimes the longest and most painful roads lead us to the most meaningful destinations, and the love of a father, I now knew, was a sacrifice that was always, always worth the price. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.